There we go. Recording in progress. There we go. And just whilst you are responding in the chat, I will just say a little word on today's sponsor, who is still the same as they were for one and two. They are the University of Hertfordshire, who are ranked in the UK's top 10% for medical sciences. And their brand new medical school will boast advanced facilities, immersive labs, digital anatomy suites, and AI-powered simulations. So they will be offering a 5-year undergraduate MBBS degree. So if you're considering an application to study a medical degree in the UK in 2026, we would highly recommend you consider the University of Hertfordshire's new medical school. So you can scan the QR code on screen to find out a little bit more. So going back to the chat now, we've got some responses. Gautam, fine enough, but like it's a bit stressful. It's probably a very apt description. AP, I need to do more practice, but I think I know what areas to improve on. Fantastic. So that is enough of our sponsor today. For those of you who attended um, episode one, episode two, you will know who our resident UCAT expert is once again. But I'll just introduce him once more time, just so we're all on the same page. So this is Hamza, who I'll pass over to in a moment, and he is one of Medic Mind's premium UCAT tutors. He's amassed a staggering 2,000 plus hours of tuition since joining us in 2020. Um, so before I hand over to Hamza, I've obviously mentioned the Zoom chat. So please do post any questions, thoughts, feelings to the Zoom chat, which we will sort of answer as we go along. And Hamza will be asking a few sort of sample questions in which I will be establishing a few sort of polls so we can gauge where you're at in terms of your own preparation. So I will hand over to Hamza to kick off.
Thanks. So plan for today is to talk about both decision making and the SJT. So in our last session, if some of you were here, we talked about verbal reasoning and quantitative reasoning. So sections 1 and 3 of the exam. Today we're going to be talking about sections 2 and 4. So the last kind of two sections that we've not yet discussed. We're going to talk about what each section takes, what kind of questions there are, the key challenges for each section. We're going to talk about core strategies for success, focusing on a couple of different question types that are commonly present across both sections. We're going to talk about time management, and we're going to do quite a few example questions in today's session. There's quite a lot kind of going on, and we want this to be as interactive as possible. So if you have any questions, or if you are kind of looking to kind of get anything out of this, then put it in the chat, because we want this to be as interactive as possible and we want people to ask questions. Yeah. So decision making in the SJT. So decision making is the second section of the UCAT. So it follows straight on from verbal reasoning. And it tests your ability to logically appraise data and come to kind of logical conclusions, as well as create diagrams and create kind of images to represent data that you are given. It is one of the sections that is assessed from 300 to 900. So it forms part of your core UCAT score, i.e. your score between 900 and 2,700. And the SJT is kind of scored a bit differently, and it's very different. So it's kind of a unique assessment. And it assesses your ability to make ethical judgments in line with GMC guidance and guidelines. The SJT is scored from band 1 to band 4, which is kind of different from the other tests. So it forms part of a secondary kind of assessment criteria as part of the in part with the UCAT. And so this is quite interesting, because the decision making section in a way can be masked by your other scores in other sections, but your SJT score is unique because it's independent from the other scores for the other sections. So how you do in the SJT is very important, because it forms its own score. So we're going to talk about decision making first, and then I'll answer some questions from the chat. So decision making, again, as we said earlier, it assesses your ability to apply logic to reach a decision or conclusion, evaluate arguments, and analyze statistical information. Usually, you'll be given some form of data. It could be a text, it could be a chart, it could be a graph, it could be a diagram, or it could be a table. And what you have to do is you have to synthesize something else from it. So you might be given a large piece of text and you might have to create a Venn diagram. You might be given a table and you'll have to create conclusions that you can draw from that table. Um, and therefore, there's a lot of different types of questions that they can ask you in decision making. And even one of the challenges that um, I faced when making these slides, in all honesty, was trying to pick out question types that I can show you that would give you a good overview of what decision making will ask. Because if I was to show you the breadth of all of the different types of questions that exist in decision making, that would be a 2 hour talk in itself. And so the biggest challenge with decision making is understanding that there is a significant variation in question types because you need to then practice all of the different types of questions that commonly come up in decision making to make sure you have an understanding of all of the different techniques that you can use to help you on test day. The other thing that I think is really important in decision making is appropriate use of the whiteboard. I would say decision making is probably the most it's the section that uses the whiteboard the most, or that the whiteboard will be the most useful tool in helping kind of answer the questions in decision making. In the same way for quantitative reasoning, that's probably the section in which um, you will um, use the calculator the most. In decision making, you're probably going to use the whiteboard the most to help you represent the data you're given. So we're going to talk about three types of questions. So I'm going to talk to you about interpreting tabular and graphical data. I'm going to talk to you about logical puzzles, and I'm going to talk to you about baseline syllogisms today. And so we're going to talk about all of these three kind of types of questions. We're going to go through key tips for all of those question types. And then I'm going to talk you through, and you're going to have a go at a practice question for each of these question types in the first half of this session. So first things first, we're going to talk about, next slide, we're going to talk about syllogisms. So syllogisms, again, kind of like every section or every question type in decision making, it's really important that you read the question carefully. Remember, assumptions in decision making can really cost you a lot of marks. So making kind of assumptions can be quite a dangerous thing. I always tell all of my students that for syllogisms, you'll be given 5 different statements and you'll have to decide whether the statements follow, i.e., yes, if the conclusion follows, or no, the conclusion doesn't follow. Your default should always be no, unless there's definitive evidence to prove otherwise. Assuming something here can really cost you a lot of marks. So be very careful about where your logic is coming from and what your logic is indicating. And that's why reading the question carefully can be really crucial. And only using the information in the question, again, can be really crucial to making sure that you don't make assumptions. Therefore, paying attention to the word choice in the question is also really important. You will often be given links between things that aren't that don't seem linked, or terms that are made up entirely. And therefore, it can be quite difficult to understand what the relationship between the different terms that you were given is. That's why paying attention to the word choice in the question can be quite crucial. Some questions can be approached by drawing Venn diagrams to show the link. And I think the question I have given as an exemplar does use a Venn diagram. And I think it's an example of one that can be solved using a Venn diagram. The last thing I've put in, and I've put this in specifically as an indicator. So the one common mistake that students make is that they assume that the relationship that is linked by all goes in both directions. The best example I give to students to show that it doesn't is if I told you that all strawberries were fruit, you would tell me, yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, I think everyone here would argue that every fruit that you eat, every strawberry that you eat is a fruit. But if I then told you that all fruit was strawberries, you'd go, wait, that doesn't make any sense because you know that there are other types of fruit. So just because all of one thing is another thing doesn't mean all of the kind of second term relates to the first term, i.e., all of X can be Y. That doesn't mean that all of Y is X, because there are clear examples for that. And it's really important to be very careful about because it's often something that they throw in to kind of throw students off and can be a huge kind of missed opportunity in terms of getting marks. Um, the next question type we're going to focus on are logical puzzles. So logical puzzles, the big thing here is tables and diagrams. So using tables and diagrams to help you decipher information can be a really good way of representing and visualizing what you're being told. The other thing I would recommend is kind of starting with the information that you definitively know. So if you are given something that is a very clear conclusion that you can draw, put that into your table as quickly as possible, and then put all of your alternative options in, and then start ruling things out. I'll show you how to do one of these later on in the session. So if people are struggling with them, if people put that in the chat, these are questions that, again, tend to be quite time consuming. Decision making is probably the least time pressured of the three core sections of the UCAT. But logical puzzles can really, can often be a time trap. And so being very kind of cognizant of the fact that you're spending too much time on these questions can be quite important. And using tables and diagrams to help rule out information that can't be true can help you save time in managing those questions as effectively as possible. Discarding relevant information in the scenario can also be quite important because, again, they can throw in things that don't help you come to a conclusion. And AP, kind of what you're saying about syllogisms is very common. It's a very common issue. You find it worse if the issues mean nonsense. That's commonly a thing that's a problem. And that's why they put them in there. It's to make the relationships seem as nonsensical as possible, because if they make the relationship something obvious or something easy, then the questions can be quite easy to do. But the relationships should be kind of nonsensical to make that question a little bit more challenging. So it's a purposeful part of the challenge, but being very careful that you're not making assumptions can be quite important for those questions specifically. And then the last question type we'll talk about is interpreting information. So again, in these questions, you'll be asked to interpret information, which will either be presented in the form of text, graphs, or charts. Using old maths textbooks or tests to find data sets which you can interpret can be a good way of practicing these techniques. But again, just doing lots of practice questions can also do the same thing. As is the same with syllogisms, taking time to read the information carefully here is very important because it prevents you making assumptions. Assumptions are a big thing that cost a lot of students marks. And making kind of drawing conclusions that aren't clearly stated by the data can be quite a dangerous thing to do. Remember, you will get some points if you get some sections within a question right, so making sure you put an answer down for everything can be quite important. The big thing for interpreting information, especially if they're tables or graphs, is being extra careful of units and axes. Often the units in the tables and graphs will be put in very small print, and reading the legends in a graph can be quite important because that will give you additional information that can help you answer the question and can give you additional information that determines what conclusions you can and can't draw from the data. Right, let's do some practice questions on this. So, example syllogism. What I want you guys to do here, probably not best not on the poll, but in the chat for this question, if you can put for the 5 questions, if you put a Y for yes if the conclusion can be followed, and an N for no if the conclusion can't be followed, And if you put a y, comma, n, comma, y, comma, n, just to show an understanding of the 5 statements, we'll talk this through in about a minute. Right, everyone able to put an answer down? Okay, let's talk this through. So, none who embrace the downtrodden are guilty of following dogmas. So, if you embrace the downtrodden, you are not guilty of following dogmas. So, these 2 circles for embracing the downtrodden do not follow dogmas. Few who are guilty of following dogmas are truly spiritual. Few is kind of just like a sum. So you can say that some are and some aren't. So therefore, truly spiritual then becomes a slightly overlapping circle with following dogmas, but not a fully overlapping circle. So few who are truly spiritual embrace the downtrodden. Few who are truly spiritual embrace the downtrodden. Not necessarily, because we don't know. We know few who are guilty of following dogmas are truly spiritual, and those don't embrace the downtrodden. So but we don't know the relationship between true spirituality and embracing the downtrodden. None who are truly spiritual embrace the downtrodden. Again, no. So it's not clear. My Venn diagram does indicate that, but we don't know that these people who are in the truly spiritual circle, but not in the following dogmas circle, whether they could loop back round and embrace the downtrodden. There's not enough evidence for that. Some who are guilty of following dogmas are not truly spiritual. Yes, because few are, so some aren't. If she is guilty of following dogmas, she does not embrace the downtrodden. Yes, because you can't. Those 2 circles are antitheses to each other. Anyone who is truly spiritual and is guilty of following dogmas would embrace the downtrodden. No, because that because we don't know of that. We know that those don't overlap at all, so they wouldn't. So it was no, no, yes, yes, no. were the correct answers. Did everyone kind of almost understand that? Um, did everyone kind of get those answers? Um, so Hassan, yeah. AP, yes. Uh, yeah, Tasmia, well done. Yeah, well done, guys. Lorna, yeah, mostly. Yeah, well done. Right, we'll move on to the next question and we'll give you time to have a go at this. So same thing, put no and yes into the questions. They're a bit difficult to see. I do appreciate that. The graphs and the plate. This is a question of my own design, so I made this question myself. So have a go at it. No worries, Tasmia. Sorry about making the question very difficult to see. Um, right, let's talk this through. So do people want to put their answers down? Some Y's and N's in the chat. Oh, very confusing.
Apologies. I tried to do a drum roll emoji. Let me go back to let me start the share again. There we go. Present. There we go. Apologies.
Y's and N's in the chat. Okay, so when approaching this question, what I want to do is I want to read the legends first. The following bar chart shows the calorie intake of a 65-year-old man named Jim. Pie chart shows the ideal composition of a healthy diet. Yes, if the conclusion follows, no, if the conclusion doesn't follow. So Jim is consuming too many calories. So there's nowhere in our information that we're told what a normal healthy calorie intake is. We're just told that your percentage of your diet, 33% should be very veg. It's just percentage of a total, but we don't know the calorie intake. The food component in which Jim deviates most from the ideal diet is carbohydrates. So add all of this up. 300 plus 900 is 1200, 1600, 1600 plus 400 is 2000 calories. 900 out of his 2000 calories are carbohydrates, which is 9 over 20 or 45% of the total. His normal should be about 33%, so he's about 12% over. But his vegetables, 300 over 2000 is 15%. So he's at least 18% deviated away from his vegetable ideal. So this is a no. Jim is consuming the right amount of, yeah, definitely very unhealthy. Based on the average Glasgow diet I did for this one. Um, so Jim is consuming the right amount of dairy. So 240 of his 2000 calories in a day are dairy, which is about 12 over 100 or about 12%. Which is his ideal amount. So that's probably about yes. Jim needs to cut down on the amount of high-fat foods he eats in order to be healthy. 180 calories over 2,000. It's about 9 over 100 or 9%, 3%. However, to be healthy, so this is, I threw this in on purpose to try and throw you off. Um, the question is very pedantic here. It says Jim needs to cut down on the amount of high-fat food he eats in order to be healthy, not to have a healthy diet, but to be healthy, which is slightly different. And this is why it's a no. The conclusion can't follow because we know he's eating too many high-fat foods compared to an ideal healthy eating plate or the ideal composition of a healthy diet. But being healthy is a very different situation, and therefore you can't draw that conclusion. Jim's meat consumption is not significantly higher than recommended. So 400, so he about 20% of his calories, 18% is the ideal. But again, this is no, because we're not told what significantly higher would be. We're not told what would be a definition of a significant increase. So you can't draw that conclusion. That conclusion is too vague to be drawn based on the information that we've been provided. So although he is eating more meat than kind of the ideal healthy plate, we don't know that's not a definition of significant highness. So I was being mean here, very tricky, and I was being the question was designed to show you the nature of decision making and the nature of not making assumptions in a question. So it maybe wasn't the nicest question in the world, but I hope it's given you a bit of an insight into potentially some of the challenges that the question could indicate. And the importance of reading the ledger and the importance of reading the legend, the importance of reading the unit and discerning exactly what information is being given. Cool. We'll do one more. This time I'll open the poll up. So A to D. Um, so have a go at this question. I'll give you about a minute and a half to do this. Right. Do people want to put a suggestion down? Okay, let's talk it through. So we've got some B's, we've got some other questions. So best way to approach these, I normally do a table kind of to show these ones, but I leave the table blank. So I only put in like headings, so street, kind of where the street is, what the pipe is, and what the direction or the region is. Okay. So we know that the street C is in the eastern region. So start with the information you know. Street C is east. Sewage pipe is in street B. Is sewage pipe. Fiber optic is in the southern region. So just put southern, fiber optic. We know that the electrical wire is neither in street A nor in the western region. Therefore, it's got to be in the street C, right? Electrical wiring has got to be in street C, which is in the eastern region, because it can't be in A and it can't be in the western region, which therefore means street A is also, well, not yet. We can't definitively conclude that. So fiber optic work is scheduled in the southern region. Street A is not present in the southern region. That makes sense. So street A is not present in the southern region. That then leaves only one option, which is street D to be present in the southern region. Street A has got to then be in. So street A is either therefore. So now we know fiber optic, electrical wiring, and sewage pipe, what they're all in. Therefore, street A has all got to be the freshwater pipe. So we can already rule out answer option A. We can already rule out, well, we can rule in answer option B because that has the correct answer because we've already worked that out. We can rule out answer option C because that's not in the northern region. And we can rule out D because we know freshwater work is happening in block A. So therefore the answer must be B. So you don't have to fill out the entire table. You don't have to show all the information for you to be able to draw a conclusion, but you have to work in a way that is efficient and start with the information you definitively know and then build up from there. Cool. That's decision making. Any questions about decision making? We'll do a quick, brief Q&A here.
Yeah, quick one.
Yeah.
Very tricky. That's all I can conclude.
They're designed to be quite tough. One of the best things, this is going to be very random, but one of the best things I ever did for practice, and I think one of the best things that ever taught me decision-making skills, um, was an old Nintendo DS game called Professor Layton. I don't know if you've heard of it.
No.
From about 20 years ago. Um, it was like it was brilliant, and you can get it now. Not as a plug for Professor Layton, but you can get it on your mobile phones. And you can get the old like DS versions of it on your mobile phones. And the first three versions of that game, or like the first three editions, um, are you can get them on your phones, and I recommend playing them. They're like small logic puzzle games, and they've got like a nice story that integrates them.
Yeah.
And the puzzles are actually really difficult. And I think I played them as a kid, and then played them again while I was doing my UCAT prep as like my downtime. Very petty of me, but they definitely taught me like the skills that I've used for decision making. So recommend. The
Brilliant.
probability crosses, the strategies for them, again, create something, so tables as much as you can to represent all of the different probability options. Some of them you'll have to do probability multiplication, some of them you shouldn't. And if you're just comparing directly probabilities, remember to keep them all in the simplest positive format that is usually in kind of a decimal or a percentage. I recommend decimals. I think they're just easier to compare. Keep them all in the same format, in as simple a form as you possibly can. And that's probably the best way to do probability. Any other questions? We'll go on for maybe 1 or 2 more minutes, just for any other questions.
Yeah, that's fine. I've left this slide up on the screen just in case it prompts anyone's thoughts. Give you 10 seconds, everybody. Oh, no questions. There we go.
Right.
Fantastic. Awesome. In the interest of time, we will crack on.
Hi there.
Now, just before I play this short video, this is a little sort of pause in between decision making and SJT. So I just want to briefly basically showcase MedicMind's new online course, which gives you everything you need to prepare at your own pace. You'll receive expert video tutorials, thousands of practice questions for mock exams, and smart performance tracking, all accessible anytime, anywhere. So I'll play this short video that sort of explains it and gives you a little bit of a visualization. So enjoy.
Are you sitting the UCAT but currently unable to improve your score? The MedicMind question bank and online course has helped thousands of students score above 700 per section. We have over 8,000 questions and 12 full mock tests, which you can practice in our realistic UCAT simulator, which replicates the exact exam conditions. Your dashboard will enable you to track your daily progress and compare your scores versus other test takers. You can practice each section by individual question type and receive specific data on your strong and weak topics. Our AI Smart Study cleverly selects recommended tests for you based on your previous performance, helping you to improve your score consistently. This course also has over 100 video tutorials covering 20 plus hours worth of content, everything you need to know about the UCAT. You can view notes, share comments with others, develop your own sets of notes, and track your progress through lessons. We can help you learn to scan read and verbal reasoning and pick out keywords in order to master these questions. In decision making, we'll teach you a simple method in order to tackle even the trickiest of logic puzzles and smash those Venn diagrams. In quantitative reasoning, we'll help you master that UCAT calculator and work out how to answer questions in 2 steps or less. In situational judgment, we can tell you everything that you need to know from the GMC guidelines and help you to achieve that band 1 that you need. MedicMind is used by 2 in 3 medical applicants in the UK, and our award-winning UCAT course is trusted by over 12,500 students from 37 different countries. We have over 1,000 reviews on Trustpilot, and all the materials were written by our founder, who scored 900 on his UCAT. So don't miss out and check out this amazing offer. Let us help you get the best possible score in your UCAT.
There we go. And more details of that very special offer for everybody on this webinar at the end. Now, I'll just touch upon very, very briefly our other services. So we, of course, offer one-to-one tuition. You could be tutored by the likes of Hamza here. We also provide UCAT live days, which are sort of intensive day-long sessions, either online or in person, a sort of speed run of the UCAT where you can sort of work in a group setting. And we have an equivalent for MMI days as well, so the interview side of things. We also offer a full application package for all medical applicants as well, which touches upon the UCAT personal statement, university consultation, and the interview preparation, as well as sort of overarching A-level tuition. And we also offer medicine work experience, which is sort of simulation based. So you'll be in a sort of a teaching hospital, learning through doing, really, in a sort of safe, fun environment with like-minded people. Now, we are slightly pushed for time, so I will hand back over to Hamza, who will lead us through the second part of today's webinar.
Yeah, so we'll try and keep this a little bit briefer. I think it's a bit quicker than the DM section, but the SJT, the final section of the UCAT, is about your ability to judge medical and non-medical scenarios and come to logical, ethical conclusions that are appropriate for those scenarios. So you'll be given a scenario and be asked to determine if a response or a factor is important to consider in your decision making, and if the response therefore is appropriate to the scenario that you've been given. the biggest challenge for the SJT is not to underestimate it. Remember your GMC guidance, read the GMC's good medical practice. It's got all of the information in it, and consider each option individually. So, the first thing I would do whenever I look at an SJT scenario is always consider who the core players in the scenario and the core issues in the scenario are. So, the core players, we need to understand that one of the GMC's main principle is making sure that you're working within your remit. You need to know if the person's a medical student, a junior doctor, or a senior consultant, because that's relevant to what their role and what they're expected to do is. Me as a medical student, I'm not expected necessarily to be doing major life-saving surgery. And so if I was as a medical student, one of the responses was to do life-saving surgery, it would probably be inappropriate. It would be a bad option to pick. Whereas a consultant surgeon, whose job it is to perform the same surgery, would be in a position where maybe for them that would be an appropriate response to a scenario. And so, therefore, understanding who's getting involved is vital. And then once you've identified that, try to think about what the big issue in the scenario is and how it has come about. Always link those to the GMC principle. That's kind of the big initial response to a question. The next thing I would do is I would also read GMC's good medical practice. So reading the good medical practice is a good, useful guide to the kind of issues that tend to come up in the SJT and what principles you can use to appropriately manage the difficulties within each scenario. Remember to consider the 4 domains and the 4 pillars of medical ethics. Can anyone in the chat list the 4 pillars of medical ethics? Kind of a big interview question, but you guys are probably not thinking about interviews just as of yet.
Oh, there we go. AP.
We've got a taker and a perfect answer. Autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. Yeah. So autonomy, the right for patients to make their own decisions. Beneficence, the need for doctors to do good. Non-maleficence, Hippocrates is do no harm. First, do no harm. And then justice, the right for all patients to be given and treated equally and fairly in accordance with their needs. So justice doesn't necessarily mean we treat everyone identically, because you don't need to treat everyone identically, but you should treat people in accordance with their needs and fairly based on their needs and requirements. Well done. And then the last thing, the most important 2 principles of medical ethics that are always important to consider are patient safety and patient confidentiality. If either of those are ever at risk, then the scenario must be managed immediately and with serious consideration of those factors. When managing difficult scenarios, it is always best to manage them locally, i.e., with minimal and only necessary escalation, and directly, i.e., at the time that they arise. Don't put off problems for later on, because those issues will just build up. Don't over escalate, because that risks harming team morale, and the person who is involved and the person who is affected can often be quite upset by an over escalation of a scenario that doesn't need to be escalated. So usually the answer options that are the most local and direct are the most appropriate in dealing with a scenario. Right, let's do a practice question quickly to wrap up. Again, a question of my own design. If you want to put in your answers into the chat, I'll give you guys a minute to consider that, and then I'll answer any Q&A questions. Okay, we've got some answers in. Important or of minor importance. Yeah. So key player is Irfan, who's a newly qualified dentist, working in a team with other dentists and local dentist practice. Underfunded, and there are not enough hygienists to support. One dentist leaves early every day as she must visit her mother in a hospital who's terminally ill. That the dentist's mother is terminally ill, that is important because personal, life matters happen, and it would be rude to not consider this factor in when you make your judgment call, because if you're too unempathetic to the fact that the mother is terminally ill, you risk harming team morale, you risk creating a toxic work environment, and you risk being unempathetic to the needs of your dentist or your workers, which is dangerous. As she tells Irfan that this is only a short-term issue as her mother is very ill. That's of minor importance, yeah. The, Even if it is just a short-term issue, it is still an issue that needs to be managed. And the implication of a short-term issue, the implication of statement 2 is that it's only a short-term issue, so it doesn't matter as much. It is still important to consider. However, um, you need to be empathetic with regards to how you approach this because it's a very sensitive issue. So well done for those who've put importance of minor importance. Can you talk to how this would relate to the GMC guidelines as you mentioned earlier? So this is working within a team, which I think is domain 3 of the GMC guidelines, and maintaining communication, which is domain 4. Both of these technically come under those domains. So I would recommend reading through those. So key takeaways, we've discussed both of those sections. We've talked about briefly about what the challenges and the format of each section is. We've talked about some core strategies for success, and we've given you some examples and how you would begin to answer them. Any questions? I saw a question up earlier.
Yeah, let me read it out to you, Hamza. So this is from Tasmia. A question in advance. So they were in this scenario. So a friend comes to you describing another person's fear of medications and unwillingness to visit the doctor due to childhood trauma. She takes herbal remedies to manage her health, but doesn't check the herbal remedies' safety. The friend bringing you this information is not a medical professional, but is very worried. What would you do as a med student, junior doctor, or consultant?
So the most important thing, I think, as a medical student, so if this is a scenario that you've been in, this is kind of an interesting ethical discussion. But one of the first priorities that you would be thinking about is, first of all, confidentiality. And actually, there's the right of this patient to the confidentiality that they are deserving of, and the right for them to make their own decisions. Again, autonomy. Um, so those are the two big kind of ethical principles. While we understand the third person, so I'm thinking that this is person X is talking about person Y's fear of medication and unwillingness to visit the doctor due to childhood trauma, takes herbal remedies to manage their health. Um, as a medical student, there's not much you can do, in all honesty. You're not a doctor, and you're not someone who's qualified enough to take into consideration all of these factors. And really, even as a doctor, if the patient has autonomy and the patient is deemed to have capacity, there's nothing you can really do if they're not wanting to visit the doctor. And therefore, what it's important to do is it's important to rebuild trust in the medical profession. In many ways, patient X's actions risk harming patient Y's um, regard for the medical profession, i.e., if patient Y feels that their information that they've told patient person X confidentially is being spread quite broadly, and I, as a medical student, then walked up to patient Y, even if I knew them, and went, "Oh, I heard that you're not going to the doctor." If I was patient Y, I would be like, "Oh, why do you know that? That's private information that I don't think should have been divulged." So understanding and being empathetic to that is quite important. I think we've got to recognize that patient Y probably has capacity to make their own decisions and make their own autonomous judgments. And our goal as a medical field should be to rebuild patient Y's trust in the medical profession. we would do that by encouraging them to visit the doctor, by providing an open ear to listen to the trauma that she's talking about, and that she's experienced in her childhood, and providing a safe space for her to explore her need. She will come to the doctor when she feels that she needs to come to the doctor. It is not either a medical student or a doctor's job to force people to access healthcare, because we can't do that. If people don't want to access healthcare, we can't force them to do it. So, long story short, providing an open ear, being empathetic, but also respecting patient wise confidentiality, and recognizing that it can be a difficult situation for them.
There we go. Thank you very much, Hamza. Now, if you do have any extra questions, do just fire them into the chat. But in the remaining few minutes, I just wanted to alert you to our fourth and final webinar, which will be again hosted by Hamza. It is on the 6th of August at the same time as today, and it will be focusing on last minute preparation. So it's a sort of a cramming session designed to sort of dot the I's, cross the T's, and make sure that you're ready for that UCAT. Now, here is our sort of our offer that we mentioned at the sort of halfway mark. So to celebrate our brand new UCAT online course, we've unlocked over 50% of the content in our free trial. So do take a moment just to scan that QR code and make sure not to miss out on a fantastic offer. I can see lots of thank yous flooding into the chat, which is great. So we can give a virtual round of applause to Hamza, who's done a sterling job after spending the day in the prison.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being engaged, asking good questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll leave that up on the board just for one more minute. Just so those of you who haven't had a chance to scan it can scan it and take advantage of this fantastic offer, which I think will really set you in good stead for next week's session, that sort of final preparation, especially the sort of the AI features that will provide you very, very in-depth analysis of where you're going wrong, but also where you're going right. So there we go. You should have had an opportunity to scan that by now. And our final slide is just a feedback form, okay? Again, with a little offer attached to it. So be in with a chance, if you complete the feedback form, of winning a one-to-one career coaching session with one of our expert careers advisors. So we got a double offer for you at the end of today's webinar. So take advantage to both. As they say, you've got to be in it to win it. Oh, thank you, Hassan, for that little scribble. No worries, no worries, no need to apologize. Awesome. Well, we are now at 18:59, so we will bid each other our final farewells. But once again, thank you to Hamza. Thank you for your enthusiasm. Thank you to our participants and your enthusiasm. And we will hopefully see you this time next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers all. Bye-bye. Cheers all. Bye. Oh, there we go, man.
Are you
Yeah.
Good work. Well done.
Thank
Got
you.
that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was a bit of a rich session.
Yeah, lots of content, which meant less questions. But I think next week's session is pretty much exclusively questions. I really don't
Yeah.
know what to say next week. Like, I think it'll be pretty much just a huge Q&A, but
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
um,
Cool. Well, I'll let you go
thank you.
and see you soon.
Yeah. Bye.